Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January Becky's Anonymous live stream. My name is Lee Hardy, and I'm really excited to be here with our guest today, Shay Stewart-Bouley, and she'll introduce herself in a second. Today, we're talking about the white moderate. And we had chosen this topic as Becky's Anonymous prior to recent events, but really are excited to have the space and time to talk about this topic, particularly in light of what our country has recently experienced. We're going to hear today about what is this concept of the white moderate, what does that mean in our history as the U.S., and now particularly what does this mean for us as white people currently. Shay is going to now introduce herself and share with us what brings her here to this space, and then we'll take it from there. So Shay, please introduce yourself and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Shay Stewart-Bouley. I'm the Executive Director of Community Change, Inc., which is a 52-year-old Boston-based anti-racism organization where for most of our existence, our work has been focused on working with folks that you might consider to be white moderates. Around creating a racial analysis that moves them to action to dismantle racism. The other thing that I also do that I'm known for is I am the creator and founder of the Black Girl in Maine website, which is a blog that chronicles sort of my own personal experiences with racism, but also we have other writers there, and we provide just a rich analysis around race, often using personal stories and cultural events. And I'm excited to be here today because I think this is a really important conversation, regardless of what happened last week or not, because I think the white moderate is something that is really prevalent in white spaces, oftentimes confused as sort of being a radical person when in fact they are not radical in their thoughts. So I'm just delighted to jump in. So thank you.
Thank you. So today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and a lot of people take this day to reflect on the wealth of words and wisdom and knowledge and speeches that he has provided to our country. And so would love to hear first, helping us understand, kind of grounding ourselves in this letter from Birmingham Jail, but in general, really, what was Martin Luther King Jr., and maybe others, talking about in their historical context about the white moderate? What was the white moderate to them? And what were they sort of warning us about the white moderate?
Thank you. That is a great way to kick off. Actually, there's a great quote I'd love to start us with from the letter itself. And here's an excerpt. The Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. So those were Dr. King's words himself. And just thinking about last summer and really the past 6 years in this country, 6 or 7 years since the rise of the BLM movement, and the critiques and the criticisms that often come from white folks who mean well, who think that, think themselves to be really evolved when it comes to race. And it often comes down to, well, this doesn't seem like the way, this doesn't seem like the time. Most certainly, I think we were all hearing that last summer when the BLM protests in light of George Floyd's murder, were happening all around the country, and people were saying, well, there's just got to be another way. Like, I agree that, it's important for Black people, to not have to deal with this, but, and it's like, anytime you start the conversation with, but, I'm probably not going to want to hear you. But I think, the white moderate is someone who says that they agree with issues of justice, and yet they don't want to be inconvenienced, nor do they want to create tension, which I believe is something that is deeply rooted in sort of the system of whiteness, the culture of whiteness, if you will, in terms of white people being socialized to avoid conflict at all cost, this adherence to time, this sense of order, yet not realizing that sense of order and all of those things really don't, they are at odds with this concept of justice and freedom and liberation, more importantly, for Black folks and other marginalized people.
I really appreciate in what you're talking about is, as a white person, really reflecting on good intentions, right? How many of us white moderates have good intentions, and how do we really match the impact up with our good intentions? That we can have good intentions all we want. And I think you're saying, you're also pushing it further, that some of us who maybe think we have good intentions, are we really walking the talk? And we can verbalize that we have good intentions, but actions are what really show what our true intentions are. And I think also this impact that oftentimes the response is that we're still not free, and white people are like, okay, well, just wait a little bit longer. We need to do these other things first. And again, it's, well, but if you're saying that this is really what your intention is and what you want to do, so I really appreciate that piece of it. Would love to kind of hear a little bit more of the danger of white moderates. I think in the words that the quote that you were talking about, I think that what is really hard for white moderates to really understand is how does white moderacy uphold white supremacy? When we think about the iceberg, when we think the tip is what we saw recently, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. But how do we really reflect on the white moderate scaffolding that's below the surface that's kind of upholding that? And so would love to kind of hear from you of how do you see kind of how white moderates, regardless of their intentions, still often uphold white supremacy? How does that relationship work?
Well, I think for me, what's coming to mind in hearing your question is the fact that for the white moderates that exist in our contemporary times, and I think this would have probably been true in Dr. King's times, but I wasn't there, so I can only reflect on my own experience, though using his words. The white moderate to me is somebody who, again, that intention piece, they mean well, but in essence, they are only really concerned with the liberation of marginalized people if it fits within the framework that's comfortable for them. So in other words, I want you to be free. I want you to not have to deal with police brutality and all these different disparities, but only if it's on my terms, which that's not acceptable. And I think we see that play out, and we most certainly, again, we've seen that play out in terms of the protests and other things that have gone on that have really, jarred the conscience of folks in this nation. I mean, I think about, the one thing that comes to mind is that a lot of people have not understood the reason for all the, protests in the past couple of years. It's like, why is this happening? Even down to quote unquote, the violence. Why are they rioting? But yet by creating this tension, we've actually moved the conversation really far along. I mean, thinking about my work in community change, people weren't calling us up in mass until things became uncomfortable. They wanted to seek more information. It was like, well, I don't understand. Like, why is this going on? I think especially in this current moment for the white moderate, for them, the pinnacle of race getting better in this country was the election of Barack Obama. And so they've really struggled to understand that actually wasn't necessarily a positive thing for BIPOC folks at all. And so it's taken that discomfort to move the needle, because I think the white moderate's natural sort of setting is to not, we can't create a ruckus here, and to really want to keep things in this white paradigm, which again, that's upholding the system of white supremacy. Even if that white moderate doesn't understand that when they say you can't create, if you're, people would support your cause if it didn't seem so violent, if it wasn't so angry. In doing that, it's like, but nothing changes unless we do make people uncomfortable. I was thinking about, I'd reread the letter today, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up, where Dr. King talks about, the oppressor doesn't necessarily just give up, they don't give up their rights without being pushed. They don't change things without being made uncomfortable. And I'm totally paraphrasing as I look for this right now. Excuse me. But
I think the way I think of this comfort really is a proxy for power, right? I'm okay with this as long as I don't really have to give up anything. As long as I don't have, as long as I don't feel like, I'm giving up any power. And I think what particularly Biden represents, right, is this kind of de facto of let's go back to kind of that time when I still felt comfortable with how race relations were in this country, back to kind of that Biden brand of white moderacy. And I think so many of us are really scared to slip back into that. So I really think this kind of discomfort of white people is really about that discomfort of not holding the power anymore. And really,
I think you're right.
Right. If we really want to end white supremacy, that's what it's going to mean. It's going to mean
absolutely. I mean, you're going to have to give up some power, and I think that is absolutely the hardest challenge for white folks, and particularly for the white moderate, to think about what is it that you have to give up. I mean, in certain circles, we talk about it like, you're going to have to give up something, your power, your resources. It's not enough to just say you're in the game. What exactly are you going to give up to make sure you're really in this game? And I think that is really the biggest stumbling block. And I think we're in this really interesting moment. You mentioned, some of us, meaning probably you white folks, it's like you're scared to slip back into that complacency that the Biden administration may represent. And at the same time, I think there are white moderates who are looking for that because it gives this illusion of change. Most certainly having our first Black, Asian VP and female most certainly allows, I think, the white moderate to feel really comfortable that change is coming. I mean, the number of online conversations that I've been a part of, I keep thinking about people going, but, things are going to change. And it's like, actually, I don't think things are going to change for the better. At best, we go back to what we had before Trump, but that wasn't good either. And so it's like getting the white moderate to really move beyond just sort of this limited framework where they get to participate, or they, according to their comfort level, without really truly being committed. And I think that's another piece of it, that's important for a white moderate. It's like, you're going to have to give up something. And I don't think that in the last several years, with all of the conversations, all of the work that's been done around anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, most of that work doesn't get at the heart of the fact that in order to truly move the needle in this country on race, white people have to give up something. Like, all the conversations in the world don't make a difference without white people intentionally stepping back and giving up something. And you're right. Thinking about the comfort, it really is about power. And people not wanting to do that, because, really address that, because I feel like that for the white moderate, if they were really to address what makes them uncomfortable about certain things, the fact is they don't want to give up their power. And to face that is then to realize I'm not much different than those people, those white people I've been talking about. We can look at what happened, the events of the past, week with this insurrection here in this country. And at least those white people, for me as a Black woman, I know where they stand. I know they don't want to give up power. That's why they stormed the US Capitol. Like, they're real clear. And in a weird way, for me as a Black woman doing the work that I do, to some degree, I appreciate open races like that far better than I appreciate the moderate, because the moderate is essentially an enemy, but it's an enemy that appears to be a friend, which makes them actually more dangerous than the person that storms the Capitol, that's, a member of the Proud Boys or any of that. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, and I think that's in Dr. King's words, is that feeling. And that was actually, I would love to kind of dive into that deeper of, what's better, a wolf in sheep's clothing or a wolf, and I think that in Dr. King's words as well, and I think this is related to where you were going before, which is, any progress we've made in racial equity in this country has been in spite of the white moderate. And I think Dr. King is really trying to challenge people to reflect on, just because you're not those people storming the Capitol, for some of you, you actually have opened the door to those people who are storming the Capitol. And where is your reflection and your accountability, and thinking about how we have made our nation vulnerable to this, and how any racial equity has not been about, oh, we've convinced white people to finally be like, okay, we'll do this. It has been people risking their lives. It has been people, making the system change. So I think so I'll just I think those two are coming together of that feeling you're exactly talking about, and how really Dr. King's words of that's really the barrier to equity, is that piece.
Just hearing your words, I was struck by the fact that you're absolutely right, that the white moderate in this moment has actually aided the other side. I'm thinking about, for the past 4 years in this country, since Trump was elected, you hear white people, well, I've got Trump relatives, I got Trump friends, but I don't want to get into it with them. And it's like, well, if you don't talk to them, who actually talks to them? Because I'm not talking to them. And so I just think about in my own work, like challenging and continuously pushing white people to be in relationship with other white people who make them uncomfortable. And it's like, I'm just having this, and I'm sorry, it's like I'm still drinking coffee because it's a weird time of the day for me. Thinking about the fact that the white moderate is really inefficient. They do not help people of color, nor do they openly advocate one way or the other with other white people. They're rather wishy-washy, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of coming to me like, okay, in this moment, you have all of these white people going, well, we're better than this. How did this happen? And yet there's a clear through line that really started many, many years ago, even before Trump. I think 9/11 was really the turning point in this country, where we started to see some of the seeds of this being planted. And now we're here. And for the past 5 years, there's been a direct through line. And thinking about the role of the white moderate, like how many of them have joined up for groups like Surge or gotten involved, and yet they never really, stay in it. I mean, I think about, just Surge chapters and the ones that I'm familiar with, both in Boston and in Maine. And I remember a few years ago, the Boston Surge chapter at one point had like 500, 600 people coming to general meetings, and over the years. And so it's like, a big thing happens. The white moderate's like, we got to do something. And then it's like, oh, wait, we got to really do something. And I think about the work, that Surge does now, tons of mutual aid, tons of being in support of communities of color, leadership of color, a real, stepping back. We're giving up our power. We're giving up our resources, and thinking about, in the end, there's just this core group of people doing that. There's not all those people. You may have 5,000 people on your list, your mailing list, but who actually shows up? And thinking that that's the behavior of the white moderate in this moment, that because they're not ready to take that deeper dive. And I think, thinking about this as MLK Day, thinking about this document and thinking that this should really be mandatory reading to kick white moderates off in their journey. I think that, we do a grave disservice to the moment. There's tons of anti-racism books that are out now compared to even 10 or 15 years ago. And some of them are good and some of them are, whatever. And yet we tell, you got a book that says how to be an anti-racist. And yet we're not asking white people, particularly the ones who would be drawn to doing that, to really reflect on where they stand so that they have a point and a place to start, so that they know where they need to grow, where they need to develop the ability to resist that moderacy that's deeply embedded within the white culture, where they don't have to speak up, they don't have to give up any power, but to really move them to realize that, your work goes beyond sending a couple of bucks to some good cause and sticking a BLM sign on your lawn or a sticker on your car and maybe going to a meeting. It really is getting in the trenches and doing the work with other white people. And then thinking about, how do I take my power as a white person and use it in service of the liberation of Black, brown, and other marginalized people?
And what I keep coming to, Shay, as you're speaking, is what is the cost if we don't? And where there's this side, right, of, what do we as white people need to give up, and but also in this moment, we've seen what is the cost if we don't, is that we'll take everyone down with us,
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And that's
planet,
what's
right,
happening.
including the planet in this moment. And so I really appreciate, how, and I think this is something in Becky's Anonymous we can reflect on, and how do we uphold both of those? What is it that we really need to think about and prepare as white, and really take action on thinking about how are we giving up power, and that's real. We need to talk about it in those terms, but also equally, what is the cost if we don't? And that cost is getting more and more real every day. And
Can I just jump in to
yeah,
say that that might actually be a really good starting point for thinking about white people who are working with white people? What is the cost if we remain moderate? I think that you can absolutely use what happened in the US Capitol as a perfect example of, well, all you white people who didn't want to talk to your white relatives, guess what? There were white people who were willing to talk to your people. And you know what? They got people who claim, I didn't even know how I got there. Like, it was like I was under a spell. Like I went to go hear Trump, and the next thing you know, I'm in a crowd beating a cop. It's like, so clearly there's somebody who will talk to your people if you don't. So the cost is, we now live in a country that has a capital that, I understand, I was reading today in the paper, has more National Guards there than we've got like in 4 different countries. I mean, it's like, I have a friend who's down there, and it's like, it's like a militarized zone. So the cost to the white moderate is that they decided to maintain this in-between place. And in the end, nobody's safe, including them, because we're now all living under this threat of what's going to happen in a few days in this country. Like, what's going to happen? I'm hearing, from folks that there are white people who are really scared about what's going to happen. It's like, well, you should be really scared about what's going to happen in this country. But I also think, what is the role that you played? And I think that that acknowledgement is going to be really important. And the work, thinking about what Becky's Anonymous does and what other white people who may be listening to this do, really just taking a step and not diving into, because I think in this moment, the past few years, what's been really seems to be the kind of operating procedure for many white moderates, they immediately sort of want to glom into, we want to follow the lead of people of color. It's like, I call it like it's a checklist. Like, you just heard it too many times on Twitter and you didn't think about it. No, I need you to think about your whiteness in this moment. I recently gave a talk, and I had someone afterwards who, like, in the review said they were really mad because I said I didn't want to talk to them about like Black folks and what we deal with. I wanted them to think about what it is for them to be white. Like, what does it mean for you to be white? And once you answer that question, then you are prepared to really go deeper in this work. And I think that's the same thing in this moment, looking at the document, talking to you in this moment. It's like, yeah, like, it's not even enough just to like examine, how do I uphold whiteness in my day-to-day life? But more importantly, if I am not being radical in my organizing and my relationships, how am I a stumbling block? And I think, again, we've got this perfect through line of, can you see what happens when you do nothing? Like, when you do absolutely nothing? Because going back to what's better, the wolf in the sheep's clothing or the wolf? Well, actually, the wolf is better for me. Because at least I know it's a wolf and it's coming for me. And I can like decide, get out of the way. But if it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, it's like, oh, in this moment, as a person of color in this country, I am personally concerned about my well-being. And it's like, well, how many of these like white folks who say they stand with me would literally put their butt on the line for me? Probably not very many. And so, like, just thinking about that, like, those are the things that I would say that the white moderate and white folks in this work need to start thinking about.
I think this is a great point to end on, and I think it really leads very nicely into kind of the ending we wanted to reflect on, which is actually the words of Dr. King's daughter. And so I'd love to read it, Shay, and then love to just hear your kind of last thoughts on how we carry all of Dr. King's words, but also his daughter's words, particularly speaking to our audience who are white women who are trying to not be white moderates. How can we help ourselves and help each other? I think you've given us a lot of direction to go in just this short conversation. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking your time and being here with us. So we'll end. I'll read these words from Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, and then Shay would just love to hear your last thoughts.
Excellent.
So kindness matters, but kindness does not equal justice. Civility counts, but calling for civility is not the humane response to injustice. Justice is. Love is essential, but love is not a passive weeping bystander. Love puts in work.
When I hear those words, and I've seen them before, Dr. King's daughter, Bernice, it's absolutely right. Love puts in the work. And I think that maybe if we put in the context of whatever loving relationships we have in our own personal lives requires work. And I think it's too easy for the white moderate to fall back on these, what I call empty platitude words: kindness, justice, love. That's all we need to change the world. No, actually, you need more than that. And I think that that's, the words of Bernice King there really provide that roadmap, that in the end, if you want to stick to love, love is an important component of this, but it puts in the work. And putting in the work means doing the examination of self to figure out what is my role in this? And then that just kind of goes back to the rest of the conversation that we just had. So I would hope for, white women listening to this, that they would use this moment to really reflect on these words, reflect on the conversation that we had, and use it also to actually read the letter from a Birmingham jail, because I think it's an excellent starting point for self-reflection for white people in this moment.
Well, thank you again, Shay, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you and hear and be affected by the great work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Work you do. All right. Bye, everyone. And just to remind you, we have a growth circle this coming Wednesday, 12 and 7 p.m. to continue to discuss within Becky's Anonymous all of that we've learned here. So thank you very much. And we welcome everyone to join us in that space on Wednesday. So thank you, Shay. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in.
Bye-bye.
Bye.